Good afternoon. Thanks for coming and thanks for joining us online via Zoom. Today's event is part of Korea University GSIS BK21 special lecture series. My name is Sijeong. I'm a faculty member here at the GSIS, and I'll be chairing the session today. Today we have our guest speaker, Dr. Hyunji Lim, who received her PhD in 2019 from School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University. She's also one of our alumni here at GSIS, the class of 2010. So we welcome you back. We also have two discussants today. First of all, we have Professor Sung-Han Kim, who's a distinguished scholar in international studies and also one of our faculty members here at GSIS. We also have Sean McLoughlin, who is a master's candidate at GSIS studying international security. So today, Dr. Rim will speak for about 30 to max 40 minutes. After that, we'll hear first from our student discussant, Sean. He's going to comment on Dr. Rim's work and a presentation for about 5 to 10 minutes, followed by Professor Kim's comments and questions. So whenever you're ready, you can begin your presentation, Dr. Rim.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be back. Security dialogue in March. So US-ROK alliance, Seoul is the treaty ally of the United States. Since signing the Mutual Defense Treaty in 1953 at the end of the Cold War, and the United States, as a result, have stationed US-ROK on South Korea and provides security guarantee via extended deterrence. Before going on to more about the US-ROK alliance and the Pacific vision, I would like to cover the concept of deterrence. So I know people who study international security, they must be familiar with the term deterrence. The concept of deterrence can be defined in various ways, but the essence of it is actually that deterrence has been an important objective of US foreign policy since the nuclear revolution in the 1940s. And so you can see, you deter someone from doing something. Deterrence is forcing the potential enemy to not take certain actions, and it lets the opponent decide its fate. And the narrow traditional deterrent, the concept of deterrence can be defined as the threat of retaliation to forestall a military attack. Of course, the concept of deterrence has been evolved since the late 1940s. And the concept of deterrence is often compared with the concept of compellence. This is Thomas Schelling's work, Deterrence and Compellence. The compellence is coercing the opponent to stop or undo something. So the main difference between the compellence and the deterrence would be compellence, the enemy is already doing something and you're trying to stop them from what they're doing or make them undo what they're doing. But the deterrence here is that actually you're giving your potential enemy the choice to say attack or not attack, So in that sense, the timing and initiative, in terms of initiative, the deterrence and compellence is, there's difference. But however, in reality, it's actually not easy to distinguish deterrence from the compellence, vice versa, because it's really hard to narrow down on what you're trying to deter, who you're trying to deter. It really, you have to work down to the detail, and they cross paths in the reality. So there are two types of deterrence. Deterrence by punishment and deterrence by denial. Deterrence by punishment is the good example of that would be mutually assured destruction, MAD. I'm sure you're familiar with the concept. And deterrence by denial, you're trying to deter the enemy by denying what the enemy's end game is. So say North Korea, for example. Deterrence by punishment. South Korea and the United States is deterring North Korea by punishment, saying that North Korea, if you launch an attack, then US-ROK alliance will retaliate. That could be an example. And example for the deterrence by denial, it could be a little more complicated. For example, building missile defense system could be one of the examples for deterrence by denial. Even if North Korea launches a couple of missiles, South Korea and the United States, they can respond and shoot down those missiles before they reach the South Korean soil, which is the end game of the North Korea in that case, is to have the destruction. Or using economic sanctions. US-ROK alliance is deterring North Korea by denying, one, it could be resources in building nuclear bombs, right? You take away that resource, the money, and cut the money line, and you let them try, and thus you deter North Korea that way. Or same economic sanctions can be used to take away the strategic surprise of North Korea. For example, with the economic sanctions in place, you can slow down North Korea's development of nuclear weapons. And in that case, you take away that strategic surprise factor. In the meantime, you can build up, say, missile defense yourself, or you just elongate that the nuclear weapons development of North Korea, and which would be the end game in that case of North Korea is to have that strategic surprise with the proper weapon in place. So as you can see, deterrence entails some type of risk calculation or cost benefits analysis on the potential opponent's part. Before it takes an action, it thinks through what this would do. Would they retaliate? What would this lead to? So there is this the calculation before they actually do something. So this study of deterrence goes back to 1940s to when the nuclear weapon was developed. So late 1940s, when the atomic bomb was first invented, and the US tested it in 1945, Soviet following in 1949, the absolute level of destruction that it can cause was just shocking to everyone. So everyone in the first wave of deterrence studies basically was wowing the nuclear weapon. And there, Brody calls the nuclear weapon the absolute weapon. Whoever has that weapon wins the war. So during the Cold War, deterrence actually and nuclear weapons is the hallmark of the Cold War policy. And with this nuclear weapon, the absolute weapon, the Brody called it the absolute weapon, and Soviet Union and the United States have reached some type of strategic stability. Both have the nuclear weapon, so they know if US launches nuclear weapon, you die, I die, everyone dies, so no one uses nuclear weapons. Maybe I said it too simply, but something like that. And the second wave focuses more on game theoretic approach to deterrence theory. So there you look at rational actors making policy decisions based on their strategic interactions. So what happens if A does this, then B does that, and then A would do this. So that type of kind of scenario building approach to deterrence studies. And then the third wave came in 1970s. And now you have enough cases that to go on about with the case studies. One example could be the Cuban Missile Crisis of the 1962. So there's a lot of study on that, that as a case study during 70s. And the fourth wave, relatively more recent trend, you can call it, focuses on broader scope. Here, I would like to emphasize it's Knopf's work, and he actually doesn't limit the measure of deterrence to military. So it could be non-military mechanism that you can use to deter a potential opponent. For example, legal mechanisms or the economic sanctions, economic measures. So there, before it was all military bombs and wars, but now it has moved on to include more different measures in executing the deterrence policy. And another noticeable thing is that the fourth wave looks at Asia. So there's a regional focus, and Bracken calls it the second nuclear age in Asia. So this second nuclear age, actually, the Bracken says the second nuclear age is driven by insecurities and also ambitions in the region, in Asian countries, triggered by Chinese nuclear test in '64 and Indian nuclear test in 1974. So with those, now rising Asia has more power, and it considers its options. And they look at developing nuclear weapons, or is more insecure by the growing powers around them. So, but the deterrence theory, as mentioned, was popular, or say the most of the work of deterrence is done about this Cold War era symmetric system. Now there is a new debate to suggest that we need more updated deterrence policy to accommodate the changing security environment. And one of that could be, there is no more Cold War Soviet Union versus the United States. So the deterrence before, it was United States deterring Soviet Union deterring the United States. But now with the Soviet Union gone, who's deterring what or whom remains a question. So now in the 21st century, post-Cold War deterrence is unidirectional, or you can say it's multi-directional towards various nuclear actors, including states and also non-state actors, like say, for example, terrorist groups. And also, like I've mentioned before, in the fourth wave, Asian regional theater is emphasized under this new security challenges, and that there's a second nuclear age coming in Asia. And the reason for it is that China and Russia both beefing up their military capabilities, under military modernization plans. And Russia is building their new missile defense system. And also in Asia, there's geographic proximity, within the region, there's potential proliferators there. And also there's conflict proneness regarding, say, territorial disputes or arms race. So while providing nuclear umbrella in the region, the United States has to now work on restraining possible rise of nuclear aspiration from its own allies, non-nuclear allies, at the same time providing the nuclear extended deterrence to them. And this remains important for the United States as well to keep the stability in the region. So one thing, we talked about deterrence. I hope I'm not going too fast. The deterrence, there's an interesting aspect to this deterrence, concept of deterrence, when it comes to in relation to alliance dynamics, which is extended deterrence. So after signing the Mutual Security Treaty, the United States provides security guarantee to South to Seoul. We call it extended deterrence. Basically, the United States is extending its deterrence capability to Korean Peninsula. And you can call it a nuclear umbrella. So Korea has prospered under this nuclear umbrella. And the goal of this extended deterrence in place is deterring North Korea, containing the spread of communism in Korean Peninsula, and achieving stability on the Korean Peninsula and East Asia. That was the goal when they signed the mutual treaty. But now you can imagine it's not just a military alliance, but the scope of the alliance. We have the US-ROK alliance expert here, but the scope of the alliance has expanded. So it covers more than military aspect of the relationships. For example, of course, FTA, US-Korea cooperation in other fields, climate change or other strategic fields. And also in terms of scope, but also in terms of geographically, it goes beyond Korean Peninsula. For example, they do the cooperation in Strait of Malacca, addressing the piracy issues there, or sending troops over to the Middle East. So it's not just Korean Peninsula that the United States and Korea, the alliance is focused on. It has expanded its scope geographically and in terms of the field. So you call that comprehensive strategic alliance these days. So I want to make sure I've said extended deterrence, and you see a lot of assurance, reassurance mentioned in the related literature. So assurance, I want to make clear so no one is confused. Assurance, so reassurance is a type of assurance that you provide to your friends. And Korea's the security guarantee that the United States is providing South Korea is a type of positive assurance and with a security focus. And extended deterrence goes under this is an example of positive assurance. And this security guarantee, US coming to South Korea's aid, it's simple when you put it that way. But what complicates it in reality is the factor credibility and confidence. So even if the United States thinks that it's providing South Korea enough reassurance, for South Korea, that could not be enough. So there is this dynamic that in order for the ally to have strong belief in credibility of the United States commitment, these two, credibility and confidence, works with the perceptions, and which is not easy. It makes everything more complicated and difficult in the real world. So if anyone's interested. So under this security guarantee, the United States, the tactical nuclear weapons were deployed in South Korea between 1958 and 1991. And in 1991, the last one was withdrawn as a disarmament initiative when Soviet Union and the United States signed a strategic arms reduction treaty. So that was it for the alliance. And now let's look at the Indo-Pacific vision. So not too long ago, actually, a couple of weeks ago, Biden had the first virtual summit on quadrilateral security dialogue, and said the four country leaders there said that they do endorse this vision, US vision of Indo-Pacific strategy. So first, Shinzo Abe was in his speech in India in 2007, mentions titled Confluence of Two Seas, here two seas being the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, says that India and Japan needs to cooperate more on a broader Asia. And here, I guess Abe was trying to get close to India for its own purposes. Some people actually go back to 2006 speech in Africa, but it was Abe's initiation. However, in 2000s, U.S. Navy was already thinking about what to do in the Indian Ocean. They knew that they had strong presence in terms of securing sea lanes of communication along the west side of the Indian Ocean, Persian Gulf to South China Sea, East China Sea. However, they knew that they don't have the same power presence in the rest of the Indian Ocean. And US Navy was already thinking about this. And 2008, acknowledging the strategic importance of India, Bush also signed the US-India Civil Nuclear Agreement. It was an effort to get India closer to the United States. And while Bush was preoccupied in the Middle East, countering terrorism, in Asia, China rose significantly and its sphere of influence expanded significantly. So when Obama took office, he announced Tibet to Asia, saying that we need to bring US back to Asia. And during that time, there was this trend, research trend and book publications on, a lot of books came out on geopolitics addressing the rise of Asia. How Asia is now the world's powerhouse, new powerhouse. And also 2008, there was oil price shock that also triggered energy security concerns. And it naturally brought in the issue of Strait of Hormuz, Strait of Malacca, those choke points that we need to secure them. So all that together, even way before Trump, this isn't Trump's invention, the Indo-Pacific Ocean. It was building up to this moment, all this trend. And then Trump came into office and announced its new priority theater, Indo-Pacific, and called it Free and Open Indo-Pacific. Let's look at Trump's Free and Open Indo-Pacific. So he announced it in 2007 after an APEC meeting. He said in the DoD report, it says, the United States must be prepared by sustaining a credible combat forward posture, strengthening allies and building new partnerships, and promote an increasingly networked region. So in that report, it really stresses preparedness, partnerships, and promoting a networked region, and names 3 countries that is threat to US presence or US posture in that theater. One is China, a revisionist power. It calls it a revisionist power. And Russia, a revitalized malign actor. And North Korea, a rogue state. So understandably, China and Russia, they're more focused on military buildups, and China is becoming more assertive than ever. And North Korea, rogue state, I guess North Korea has been a rogue state for a long time. And then after Trump came Biden. So Biden's Indo-Pacific and the Quad. So you saw how Biden make his first steps to secure US interests in Indo-Pacific, seeing how Chinese influence and adventurism could and may have already started to bring deterrence erosion in the theater. So Biden and the Quad actually called it Free, Open, Secure, and Prosperous Indo-Pacific. And during that, the full name is actually Quadrilateral Security Dialogue. But recently you see the Biden administration dropping security dialogue part and referencing itself as this group as more as a Quad. And the Quad, as you know, is made up of the United States, India, Japan, and Australia. So they confirmed that they have a shared vision for an Indo-Pacific that is free, open, resilient, and inclusive. And the Quad is a flexible group of like-minded partners dedicated to advancing a common vision and to ensure peace and prosperity. So during that meeting, the virtual meeting that they held, they agreed on more on a transnational issues and activities, such as they agreed on a vaccine initiative led by a Quad vaccine experts working group, or they strategically emphasized climate change issues or Paris Agreement. So the Quad, according to Thornton, who used to be the Assistant Secretary of State under Secretary for East Asian and Pacific Affairs under Trump administration, said the impetus behind the Quad has been an effort to get India to be more active in the East Asia region, bigger contributor to a global public goods. And the public face of the Quad wants to be about attacking these transnational issues like climate change, pandemic, and technology issues. However, she also goes on and notes that the hidden symbolism is, of course, against China. I think they will be able to work that balance going forward. This is what she says. And of course, you see China not welcoming the Quad. So China thinks this Quad is an extension of containment of China and containment policy against China, especially now you see a lot of studies on Chinese BRI, Belt and Road Initiative. And what Chinese Belt and Road Initiative essentially is increasing, it's an effort to increase Chinese influence and coercive leverage through connecting regional continental powers. So China thinks that Quad is addressing this rise of China's BRI efforts. And China expert Roland, she always has something interesting to say. She says in her testimony that it is primarily about the Indo-Pacific, that China doesn't really have this concept of Indo-Pacific. For China, Indo-Pacific is their backyard. But Indo-Pacific, it is primarily a maritime geographic expanse that links US to an economically vibrant region and a critical strategic space where many of its key military allies are located, an area the US envisions as free, open, secure, and prosperous. So personally, I think this is where the Indo-Pacific US Indo-Pacific strategy is at. It's more of a vision. It lacks, well, we can go on to discussion later on, but it's more of a vision for now. It doesn't have detailed or sophisticated strategies yet. So after this Quad meeting and the 2+2 meeting that Biden's team had in China, there was a domestic criticism that this 2+2 meeting in China didn't really bring anything. Some was hoping for more cooperative aspect in the talks, or someone was hoping that there will be restart on communications between China and the United States. But that didn't happen. And it was more of an airing of frustrations, if you saw the press conference. So there's domestic debate that is on Indo-Pacific, US Indo-Pacific strategy. Is this America's way forward? Or is this America's Indo-Pacific folly? So on that note, recent foreign affairs op-ed, Van Jackson notes that he's East Asia specialist. He notes that he criticizes this Indo-Pacific vision on 3 grounds. One, Indo-Pacific it's not well defined and it's under operationalized, and it's just no one knows what that is as of now. And 2, by putting everything together and calling it an Indo-Pacific vision, he argues that US risks US policy sophistication and also tailored US policy towards the region. So he especially notes that Southeast Asia is a different game than East Asia, Northeast Asia, and putting them together and calling it one thing, that's not going to work. That's basically what he's saying. And it could lead to overextension of US power. So he does say the goal of free and open Indo-Pacific may sound noble, but pursuing it will lead the United States astray. So that's where he stands. And similar to that, but Fareed Zakaria actually notes comments on the budget issues. So he says using China, US is using China as an excuse for this huge new budget. And in his words, Fareed Zakaria argues that US already has that edge over China. So United States spends 3 times more in terms of defense budget than China, has 20 times more nuclear bombs and weapons than China. And United States enjoys 800 overseas bases, whereas China has 3. So all that, looking at all that, everything puts United States way above China, and why are we spending so much? That's his argument. And despite all this, recently, Indo-PACOM has asked for a new budget for its new PDI, Pacific Deterrence Initiative. It's like a Asian version of European Deterrence Initiative, and asked for over 4.6 billion for 2002 alone, and 22.69 billion for the year between 2003 and 2023 and 2027. So in his head, I guess he's trying to think, why is the United States spending so much on military hardware and defense? You know, if you're competing against China, look at China. China's building railroads and ports, and United States is spending this much on military. So that's the question that he raises. And also, Ben Jackson, on the similar note, says that China is playing a home game here. It doesn't have any extended deterrence commitments, so it's spending for itself only. And there's no way that United States can beat that. US will always have to spend more to project its power in the region, in addition to protecting its allies in the region. So that's the point that it's making against the Indo-Pacific vision. And on the other side of the debate is American way forward. People like Richard Haas, the president of Council of Foreign Relations, note that Asia is an important region and that the United States should work with its allies to provide public goods in the region. This is like suggesting the American version of BRI. And Randall Schreiber, the former Assistant Secretary of Defense for Indo-Pacific Security Affairs under Trump administration, he also notes that Indo-Pacific, the emphasis on the regional theater, and says the US military edge, keeping and maintaining the edge is important, but also achieving a high degree of confidence is important too. So he supports this. He really thinks that Indo-Pacific vision is the American way forward. So he, one of the quotes that I have here is, he really stresses the allies, role of allies, and says, our greatest asymmetrical advantage in China-US competition are the allies. And this debate is likely to continue, if not grow, along the road, depending on the US-China relationship and also the progress or non-progress made in terms of the operationalizing the vision, the Indo-Pacific vision. So it really boils down to 3 things when it comes to US Indo-Pacific strategy. 1, the vision originates from the geostrategic concern over this regional theater, Asia. And 2, US acknowledges potential Chinese threat and what it can do to US presence in the region. And 3, the relational aspect of the vision, the alliance and networks, the relational aspect becomes ever more important in Indo-Pacific strategy. So US allies, some do lament that, American power is waning vis-a-vis the rise of China. However, all the fundamental elements that it had put down, and for example, democracy, free trade, human rights, all those will not let this largest power wither quickly. Maybe it can go down a little bit, but it's not going to go away in one day. So the So what is important here is that the allies is upholding and spreading these shared norms and values and common interests. And this is vital to the United States. So this is the core asset Washington has for self-preservation and a fail-safe device. And this is where US-ROK alliance comes in. Seoul, they called it a linchpin for security and prosperity in the region. And this linchpin is special. It's different from other US allies in the region. If you look at it, Japan, Philippines, and Australia, they're all islands. But South Korea is the only ally, the continental ally. What that means is that there's a strategic value there. So the USFK and the ROK alliance there provides, keeps the US relevant in the area in terms of continental access. And also it provides a practical foot in land power projection of the United States. And that's an important aspect that some people don't really look at. And because Korea is such an important linchpin, what Jung Park, now Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, she used to be the chair, SK chair, Korea chair at Brookings. In her report, she says China seeks to loosen this linchpin for their own good. All right, so South Korea, where does it stand? What is it doing or not doing in terms of this Indo-Pacific vision? So far, South Korea has shown hesitancy, or some call it strategic ambiguity, but hasn't really shown the full official support for the Indo-Pacific vision yet. And there could be a couple of reasons behind it. One is, of course, China. So Korea, 1990s, from amicable cooperative relationship to 2008 strategic partnership, the interdependency grew between China and South Korea. And along the way, it seems like the policymakers in Seoul have lost their principle or long-term direction on how to thrive under these two great powers competition. So Korea still holds this memory of thought deployment and how China retaliated by boycotting the Korean tourism industry. So there's a bitter memory there. And the second region could be North Korea. Moon administration has been from the very beginning, from the day one, dedicated its priorities to South and North rapprochement. And this made the Moon administration very sensitive to North Korea's Kim's reactions. And this is another reason why Korea is hesitant. And Scott Snyder actually wrote a book about North Korea, South Korea at crossroads. And there's an important point that he makes. He says in Seoul's foreign policy decision making, there is always these two powers kind of competing. One is inward looking parochialism, and the other one is outward looking internationalism. So there's these powers always competing. And what it means for US-Korea alliance is that US-ROK alliance is that one, the inward looking parochialism wants to focus on South Korea's, South Korea, the Korean Peninsula, whereas the internationalism focuses on to expand the focus of the alliance. And this means for Quad is South Korea afraid or fears that by joining or by supporting Quad, would it distract the US-ROK alliance from inter-Korean reconciliation or national reunification? And that's, I think that's one of the reasons why Korea is so hesitant. However, this indecisiveness is actually fatal, in my opinion. It reflects a significant flaw in South Korea's thinking. Say if China and North Korea sees that South Korea perceives an outright alignment with the United States as a risk that it needs to take, then it will be the beginning of their undermining of South Korea's diplomatic or foreign policymaking capacity in the international political arena. But on the other side, flip side, if the United States is convinced that that is what South Korea thinks, then that is also problematic too, because then it will be the beginning of an underconfident alliance that suffers from the credibility issues. So South Korea and the United States has been allies for 70 years, and they're deterring North Korea and China's Chinese adventures. And there's another, maybe I'll make that point later. In my opinion, there shouldn't be a hesitation in showing support for US-led Indo-Pacific vision, especially when the subject of the support is tackling transnational issues. No one's going to raise questions for that. And to achieve the level of policy sophistication it needs to thrive under US-Sino rivalry, Korea needs to not choose side, United States or China, but needs to learn to work with both of them. South Korea is not the only case where it's US allies and also has strong trade ties with China. Look at Japan, Australia. Australia is having hard times, but still, it's not specific unique case to South Korea. And I would like to mention the timing of supporting the Quad. Well, China already knows South Korea is a US ally. We've been open about that past 70 years. And the Quad is stressing its potential in tackling global issues like policy coordination on COVID vaccines and stuff. So this pandemic actually presents a perfect timing for South Korea to show support for the Quad if or when China shows its discontent. And by supporting Quad, there's three things that Korea gains. One, Korea can gain upper hand. As the Quad seeks more middle powers to join them, there should be an upper hand for the early supporters. As I mentioned, the vision is not concrete yet. So by supporting them and going in with full participation, it's actually an opportunity for South Korea to build together a future-oriented group to establish a vetted interest in issues of Korean national interest, such as reunification, North Korean denuclearization, or climate change, which South Korea is leading already, or how to prepare for the reunification or North Korean defector, all the issues like that. Korea can actually work with the group on those issues. They're not mutually exclusive. And also, South Korea can strengthen its ties with Southeast Asia, which the Moon administration is doing already under New Southern Policy. And three, gain leverage in dealing with China and North Korea. I think the third point is the most important point, that it could actually be by active and firm participation, Korea can weave this network with other countries in different issues, that it makes it less vulnerable to Chinese unilateral pressure on ROK-China relationship, like in the case of THAAD or THAAD. So gaining leverage in dealing with China and North Korea, this could actually, supporting Quad could be actually the most effective proactive deterrence measure that Korea has as of now. Am I going, is this on? All right, well, I would end here and I will welcome any questions, comments, and look forward to the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rim, for an interesting presentation. I think the overarching theme that you've covered in your presentation today, including the geopolitics of the Asian region, the role of the US and what strategic position we, South Korea, has to take, all these things are one of the topics that our students here at the GSIS are particularly interested in. And one of the students who is actually working on a related topic is Sean, who's our student discussant today. So we'll first gonna hear from him, his comments and questions to you, Dr. Ring. And then you can probably take maybe a couple of minutes to respond, and we'll move on to hear Professor Kim's comments. And after your response, we're also going to have an open Q&A session so that you in the audience can also ask questions and provide your comments. And those of you who are joining us in Zoom, you can also leave your comments in the Zoom chat screen that I can also take notes, and I will pass your questions and comments to Dr. Ring. So Sean, whenever you're ready.
Sure. Good afternoon. So my name is Sean McLoughlin. I'm a fourth semester student at KU GSIS, studying international peace and security. And I just want to say thank you for this really fascinating, super interesting presentation and your paper. And maybe perhaps on behalf of the KU GSIS students, welcome back. We're happy to have you. It's really awesome to see, a KU GSIS graduate who, graduated from here and then proceeded into the field, and to see how much of an expert you've become on this topic. So thank you for coming back. Perhaps I have two topics I want to touch on. The first one is the Quad, which we divide in kind of talking point. I was kind of disappointed to see South Korea absent from the Quad when I first read about it. I thought maybe this was a new United Nations command structure. So when I saw it was the US, Japan, Australia, which are already members of the UNC, and then India with the omission of South Korea, it was a little disappointing, I guess I would say it that way. And I started thinking, was this perhaps an oversight by the US administration? Was there a breakdown of cooperation? Was it perhaps related to the trade dispute between Japan and South Korea with the preferred trading whitelist? Were these kind of things all considerations and why South Korea was not part of it? Was it just Quad sounds better than Flint? I guess is 4 versus 5. I'm not really sure. Or is it, I think, as you said, you use the term strategic ambiguity, which I thought was really interesting because there's some potential plausible deniability on the ROK side where it could be viewed as a hedge between the US and China. Who knows who's going to be the dominant player in the region in 10, 15, 20 years. So perhaps pessimistically, those are the things that came to mind at first. But I tried to look at ways in which maybe there could be an optimistic spin on this. The ROK is an ally of all the countries that are in the Quad. So is it a matter of de facto versus de jure, as in which is there some flexibility built into that? Is it a positioning where perhaps South Korea can communicate with North Korea, communicate with China, and then have a little bit more flexibility in saying, we're not in the Quad, we might join it if you don't give us some concessions. That's a way of kind of leveraging the position. Or perhaps is this a way of easing India into more active participation in the Indo-Pacific as a way of maintaining less, let's say, polarizing position of adding South Korea, and then there would probably be a North Korean rebuttal, and then China's going to say something. And this is a way of kind of moving the alliance talks along in a less provocative manner, perhaps. So that was my thoughts on Quad. Also have thoughts on the South China Sea. Keep going.
Comments, all the good questions. I cannot answer. I'll try my best. So you mentioned the absence of Seoul in this talk. And I noticed that in the CRS, the Congressional Research Service report on Indo-Pacific, vision and strategy, there is no mention of South Korea. And that reflects the current, I guess, situation. That is why people in DC is trying to talk to South Korea and include get South Korea's support on Quad. And I do work with, there's another project that I'm part of, and I interact with a lot of US military folks. Of course, I know they cannot disclose anything top secret, but from what they're saying, when it comes to the talk about Quad and quadrilateral security dialogue, the South Korea is almost non-existent. They mention South Korea maybe once or twice when North Korea mentions. And I think that's a problem. That shows how weak South Korea's position is in US policy circle and in terms of US-ROK alliance strategy. And you said, why is that? I don't think there was this one event that led to this, but I think it was a build-up, and the most fundamental reason, I think, is that what the United States has pictured for the US-ROK alliance doesn't necessarily align with what South Korea has in mind for the US-ROK alliance. And this is even true more so under this current administration. So it looks like the new administration puts more focus on the inter-Korean issues, the Korean Peninsula, Korean reunification, how to warm up to North Korea, how to bring peace on the Korean Peninsula, but not necessarily on other issues that it could do with the United States. But for the United States, yes, North Korea is important. It's a destabilizer for the regional security. However, there's a bigger problem. There is rising China, Russia, and North Korea, and all of their interactions. So I think they're operating on a different level right now, and this is why South Korea isn't really going its full support for this large, broader scope of activities that we can do or contribute to the US-ROK strategic partnership. And
Oh yeah, you go.
you mentioned strategic ambiguity, and this is actually what Japan is saying, that it's the strategic ambiguity in terms of the Quad. Quad, it started out as quadrilateral security dialogue, but its official name is not contained China policy. And there's a lot of holes and loops that it can work with. That India, for example, is the leader of the non-aligned movement, but it's joined the Quad, which means there is room for India to benefit from this, even though it presents itself as a non-aligned leader. So if Japan is doing that, I think it's related to the point that I made. You join early on, you support, you go in with full participation, and you make the group so that it can address your interests.
You also had a comment on factor.
Thank you for your response. I guess the second one would be regarding Chinese adventurism, as it's sometimes referred to in South China Sea. If we look at where China is building new islands, the Marshall Islands goes down to Seoul. This looks very reminiscent of the Nine Dash Line, which China made the proclamation about 70 plus years ago. Essentially, all of the South China Sea has Chinese sovereign territory, and the official stance on it from the UN via the UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, says that China has no legal claim based on, as outlined within the law, is an exclusive economic zone, which is 200 nautical miles from sovereign territory. We see China's building military bases, or they're creating territory in the ocean. Replacing military bases that are flying the Chinese flag, it's being manned by Chinese sailors, and then in which case it does become Chinese territory. And then the UNCLOS laws would apply to this territory. And of course, that puts China how do we combat this? Because from what it looks like to me, it looks kind of like sort of Chinese neo-manifest destiny, where they have this historical claim on this territory. They're using modern institutions and laws as a way to marry the two together. Not direct conflict with laws.
China's South China Sea. This is where why the U.S. Indo-Pacific stresses, emphasizes networks. So not just allies, but the networks in the region, which addresses this issues like this. For example, this is why Southeast Asia is the next hot zone for the clash of two big powers. And U.S. sees this, what China's doing there, and until this is the potential threat in the future. So this is why the Quad is not on the surface, but containing China mechanism is trying to strengthen the network among the allies in the region and promote the networks in the region amongst the non-allies and the networks of the allies and non-allies. So with that strong network and relationship, the United States believes that it has more leverage that it can use on the Chinese power in that region.
Thank you very much. Now we will hear from Professor Kim.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to congratulate for the BK21 seminar. I believe it is not the first one. Maybe there have been a series of seminars. I think this belongs to the peace and security track of KU GSIS. I feel like we are making a good progress in terms of the level of knowledge and expertise, which is fine. And secondly, I really enjoyed listening to Dr. Rim's presentation on Indo-Pacific strategy as well as deterrence. By the way, my first comment is that I haven't found very clear-cut kind of a linkage between deterrence on the one hand and the Indo-Pacific strategy on the other. So if you may, I think I kindly ask you, Dr. Rim, to elaborate the point of linkage between deterrence on the one hand and the Pacific strategy, which is mainly led by the United States. In my understanding, the first kind of a key word that has come to my mind is US provided extended nuclear deterrence, which is one of the key pillars of so-called comprehensive strategic alliance between ROK and the United States. But as you know, North Korea is rapidly upgrading its own nuclear missile capability, including ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missiles. But as is well known, in terms of capability and political will, United States is being questioned about the reliability or credibility of extended nuclear deterrence for ROK and Japan. That means, if I elaborate, particularly when the United States is being threatened by North Korea, for example, when North Korea threatens to attack with its own ICBM, whether it is single warhead, multi-warhead ICBMs against New York or Washington, then under those circumstances, we have to question whether United States is willing to defend, is willing to extend its nuclear deterrence for ROK and Japan. This is kind of a double or triple kind of a dilemma. That is exactly what North Korea is aiming at, to drive a wedge between the U.S. Security for its own mainland and the U.S. alliance relationship with ROK and Japan. That's why U.S. nuclear deterrence is being put on the table in terms of its capability and political will. Probably we don't have much doubt about the capability side, but the problem is the political will of the United States. So that's why many pundits in Korea are providing us with some options, alternative kind of options, including redeployment of tactical nuclear weapons, or kind of a NATO type of nuclear sharing. As you know, United States is still maintaining a certain amount of tactical nuclear weapons in 4 European countries, including Italy, Belgium, Germany, and one more. So within that context, the United States is sharing its tactical nuclear weapons with NATO allies. Similarly, United States, as you know, United States had withdrawn all of its tactical nuclear weapons in early 90s, but it is time for us to consider the redeployment of those tactical nuclear weapons back to South Korea, believing that only nuclear weapons can deter nuclear weapons, not conventional weapons. So that is option number 2. And the last one, that is probably the last resort for South Korea, as well as Japan, kind of South Korea's nuclear self-arm. So these kind of options to be considered. Otherwise, it is really kind of futile for us to talk about extended deterrence provided by the United States, and how this kind of the U.S. strategy for its own key allies like Korea and Japan, and in this vein, how United States can persuade those countries to extend their own cooperation for U.S. Kind of a more region-wide threat, such as Indo-Pacific threats. That is one point, and the second point is Korea's own kind of a deterrence and defense kind of a strategy against North Korea's missile nuclear missiles. Previous governments have prepared the so-called 3-axis system that consists of kill chain and KAMD and the KMPR. So kill chain is kind of a preemptive strike capability. So you have to detect and destroy. And the KAMD stands for Korea Air Missile Defense. So that's why Korea has been rapidly developing its own missile defense systems. But the problem is whether those systems are workable without very systematic kind of cooperation between Korea as well as U.S. Surveillance and reconnaissance kind of capabilities. According to so-called the three no positions of South Korea, South Korea is not supposed to join the U.S.-led missile defense system, which means South Korea's kill chain or KMD or even KMPR, Korea massive retaliation and punishment strategy. The key kind of element or backbone for those mechanisms is surveillance and reconnaissance, kind of those strategic assets. Without them, those three axes are not workable. But due to those three no strategy, three no positions, no joining US-led MD, that is the first one, and the no more THAAD, terminal high altitude area defense, and lastly, no to three-way military alliance among US, Japan, and ours. I think in terms of deterrence measures or deterrence strategy is very fragile. Dr. Lim distinguished deterrence into two kinds: deterrence by denial and deterrence by punishment. Kill chain and KMD, that belongs to deterrence by denial, and the KMPR is deterrence by punishment. But for those systems to be workable, you have to come up with what? The surveillance and reconnaissance capabilities. Korea has no military satellite. They begin to procure those satellites starting next year, which will be taking several years, which means for the next more than several years, Korea's key deterrence mechanisms are not working, which means Korea has to rely on the U.S. Surveillance and reconnaissance capabilities. So this kind of irony is taking place, which I believe is seriously threatening Korea's deterrence measures. My final point is about quadrilateral cooperation among US, Japan, Australia, and India. According to official documents, this is not officially targeting China. Susan Thornton, after she has retired from the government, she pointed out, as Dr. Lim mentioned, there's a kind of anti-China symbolism or symbolism against China. But that is literally symbolism. But when President Donald Trump announced the Quad his first year, I thought there was something in there, but it turned out to be nothing, as Dr. Lim correctly pointed out. There are no beef in there, only soup, no chicken either. So I think Joe Biden administration is trying to fill those loopholes because Donald Trump's Indo-Pacific strategy, or Quad, FOIP, free and open Indo-Pacific strategy, has been kind of a much ado about nothing. Okay, So that's why Joe Biden administration is filling in those loopholes. Nevertheless, it is still a vision. And according to Tony Blinken, he has been quoted as saying this is informal gathering among like-minded countries to discuss non-traditional security challenges throughout the region, such as pandemic, uh, climate change, etc., etc. So this is a perfect environment for U.S. allies like ROK to join, because it is yet to be anti-China or counter-China kind of alliance mechanism. This is informal gathering for like-minded countries. If they don't mind, China is welcome. Well, why not ROK? Why ROK should be hesitant to join it? So I think there are three reasons for ROK to join it. The first one, first reason is that this is really a fantastic vision, free, open, secure, and prosperous region. Okay, particularly the Western Pacific Ocean. Okay, they do not belong to a particular country. From the South Korean perspective, 90% of their oil importing tankers are going through the Malacca Strait, which is very near to South China Sea, right? So the freedom of navigation in the South China Sea is critically important for our economic security. And secondly, this is a networking strategy, which is mainly driven by the United States. So networking is not official alliance. So there is no reason for ROK to get hesitant. And lastly, if ROK doesn't join it, I think US-Japan alliance will be much more empowered to play a critical and central role, not just in Northeast Asia, but also throughout the whole region of East Asia. So I think if ROK tries to call ROK-US alliance as a comprehensive strategic alliance, I believe the so-called military alliance between ROK and the United States should be confined to the Korean Peninsula. But non-military kind of cooperation between Seoul and Washington should be extended to Western Pacific, East China Sea and South China Sea and Southeast Asian region. So this kind of comprehensive thinking should be embedded into comprehensive strategic alliance. Otherwise, ROK-US alliance should be revised back to blood alliance or military alliance, not comprehensive strategy. Thank you.
I was presenting this Indo-Pacific it was an example of fourth way strategy, but it has non-military limitations. So it has non-military limitations and as mentioned, beyond the Korean Peninsula, it works on other issues, freedom of navigation. So there is that aspect. Also, it works with positive and so incentives in terms of punishment characteristics. It does work with traditionally when you say deterrence strategy, it usually refers to retaliation, negative inducements. But here, there could be positive inducements as well in this fourth wave. So I guess there is that link that we're seeing between the deterrence and Indo-Pacific vision, and where this is an example of this new type of deterrence that is invented to fit to address the security challenges that we and also, I'd like to make a point on US-Japan alliance. The Richard Haas and his testimony mentions how US-Japan alliance actually Taiwan is a couple. But there's no mention of South Korea. It's one of the many things that implies that for US, it almost seems like the US is just letting Korea sit there. Doesn't give it. Actually, it could go both ways. It could be hesitant or careful or concerned to push a big role to South Korea because it understands that now it's in a difficult position with North Korea or China. Or it could simply mean that the US, for US, the value of the US-ROK alliance is diminished, which I think is problematic for South Korea's own interest. So using this Indo-Pacific vision and the Quad, if it's a network that Korea can work with to pursue Korea's own interests, I know some here in Korea says this Indo-Pacific vision is Japanese initiative. So it's Japan's initiative, so Korea should go with it. It doesn't really matter, regardless of who initiated it or Japan. Korea does not have to pursue something because Japan is pursuing something. But at the same time, Korea does not have to avoid something because Japan is pursuing. We could have counterpoints. So regardless of Japan or its stance, Korea needs to pursue its own interests logically and strategically when it comes to foreign policy, especially these alliance management. And there was mention of this the Quad turning into Asian version of NATO. There's when the Quad first came up, there was a fad. There was a trend that maybe this could be the future of NATO in Asia. But I think realistically that's not like something because the starting point is very different. For NATO, there was a common enemy or adversary, Soviet Union, that everyone was on a similar stage or level in terms of economic development. We were all in a similar situation. But here, like one of the arguments that I makes, Southeast Asia and Northeast Asia, there's a gap between Asia. And since they're not on the same level, it's hard to pursue something like Asian group.
Yeah, let us take a couple of questions from the student audience or our faculty audience as well. We got around 10 minutes left. Anyone? Yes, can you turn on your microphone when you speak? And introduce yourself first.
Hello, is it okay? Hi, my name's David Kay. I'm a first semester student in IPS. One thing Professor Kim mentioned was about the deterioration of the reliability of the United States extended deterrence. And I guess I'm wondering, right, the reason for that being the lack of political will in the United States rather than lack of capabilities. Would South Korean participation in the Quad, would that lead to strengthening reliability of the extended deterrence in your opinion? And if so, how? And if not, are there, right, what do you think is the best strategy to strengthen that reliability?
If there's any other question, I would like to collect one more so that she can respond. Anyone else? Yeah.
Question. Question is that one of the South Korea has sensitivity. What kinds of this sensitivity? Why is it is related to the joint thought? Because thought is the security is somehow I think link between North Korea problem and not strongly related. So
Question first. So how North Korea relates to Quad is that Quad is based on US Indo-Pacific vision sees North Korea as a third state. Yes, so it is, but to say, in the back of new administration's head, it always needs to calculate what will North Korea think. The progress of it, or the future. Simply say if the Kim is mad about South Korea's joining the Quad, the top will. So naturally, sensitive to how would North Korea react back to them. Yes, the reliability, very important issue. I think, and personally, I do think that US-ROK alliance has suffered a little bit from Obama's strategic patience regarding North Korea. Well, during Obama administration, I think Obama, I guess I can't say for him, but it seems like their policy was to wait and see what North Korea does, and we would respond or do things accordingly. And some would say, oh, that's a very strategic move. But on the other hand, it could mean that, well, the United States right now, as of now, don't have any plans, don't know what to do, so we'll wait and see. And I think it's a little bit of both. And the US-ROK alliance has suffered a little bit from that. And also with the Moon administration, the reliability, since the two allies don't necessarily see things the same way, they have looks like when it comes to Korean Peninsula, they have different goals. So that drove, I think, the United States and South Korea. It's not like the alliance collapsed, but there is, there's ups and downs, basically. But right now, I don't think it's in place in terms of reliability. And it's not that the Korean Peninsula attack all that, yes, it could, it matters and it is important. But fundamentally, what is important is to rebuild the trust, to confirm that two parties agree on things. Say, for example, if Moon wants to pursue rapprochement with the North, and it comes before, say, denuclearization of North Korea. But for the United States, denuclearization comes first, and then it may come to reunification. Then the policy priorities completely off, and it's not going to work that way. So two parties, in order to regain trust and the confidence in each other and build this credibility, they need to work together, sit down together, and talk about what their goal is, what their common reaffirm what their common interest is. I think that's the most important thing. And off the record, I guess Moon is too focused on Korean Peninsula. He needs to see beyond Korean Peninsula. US-ROK alliances more than alliance. It is an important aspect, but there's more to it.
Thank you very much. Our scheduled time is actually over. I think it was perfect time management on our side. So I thank you again, Dr. Rim, for fascinating presentation and for sharing your perspectives. I also thank the discussants for today for your constructive comments and questions, and also for the audience for your interesting and thoughtful questions. So this is it for today. Thank you all.